Hello everyone and welcome to the Shabbat Chazon edition of iTorah. I'm sure many of you are aware of the Medrash which says that if the Jewish people were to keep 2 Shabbatot, the Messiah would come. Now I've heard it said that those 2 Shabbatot refer to Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, prophesied by the prophet Jeremiah of the destruction of the temple, and the Shabbat Nachamu, which is the Shabbat after Tisha B'Av, prophesied by the prophet Isaiah, who consoles the Jewish people and promises them the future redemption. And so what the rabbis are saying is that if we keep these 2 Shabbatot, we keep in mind, in other words, the prophecy of destruction by Jeremiah and the prophecy of restoration by Isaiah, then the Messiah will come. But what does this really mean? There are those who understand destruction and restoration as being 2 totally separate things. There are bad things which happen in life, and there are good things which happen in life. The notion of 2 Shabbatot, Shabbat Chazon and Shabbat Nachamu, coming together, is the understanding that the bad things that happen to us are really the genesis of the good things. And similarly also that the good things very often that happen to us could not occur were they not preceded by certain bad things. So that the idea of 2 Shabbatot, Shabbat Chazon and Shabbat Nachamu, is the understanding that these 2 really complement each other. That the bad is necessary for the good, and that the good can only come about as a result of the bad. In other words, that there really isn't any bad in life. And bad is really the genesis and the beginning of some future good. This idea is actually discussed at length by the famous Jewish philosopher Rabbi Yehuda Lau, commonly known as the Maharal. The Maharal gives, in fact, a metaphor which explains this. He says, take, for example, the egg. The egg is a good source of food, good source of nourishment. From the egg comes a chicken. A chicken is an even better source of food, an even better source of nourishment. Now, for the egg to be transformed into a chicken, a certain process has to be undergone. And during this process, the original egg decomposes, becomes inedible. There's a period of time in which you would open up that egg, you would find a bloody mess full of gore, quite unappetizing. And it's only after this process is completed that you finally have the chicken. So the Maharal explains that for the chicken to be born, it's necessary for the egg to be destroyed. And he explains this in terms of a rule, in which he says, "Efshar lahavia ela im ken kedamo hefsed." It's impossible for there to be a higher existence unless the previous existence has been destroyed, no matter how good that previous existence was. In this way, he explains the very famous Medrash. It's actually the beginning of Medrash Eicha, in which we read that on the very day of Tisha B'Av, the Messiah was born. Now, does this mean to say that chronologically and literally the Messiah is born on Tisha B'Av, on the day of destruction of the temple? Rather, the Maharal explains that the destruction of the temple and the birth of the Messiah are in fact 2 sides of one coin. It was impossible for the future redemption heralded by the Messiah to come about unless Tisha B'Av, with its horrible destruction, had taken place. And therefore, at the very moment of the destruction of the temple, at that moment, the Medrash says, the Messiah was born. What the Medrash means to say, explains the Maharal, is the destruction of the temple is the birth of the Messiah. Perhaps not literally the birth of the Messiah, but certainly the very first step of redemption. In a similar way, the Maharal explains the story which is mentioned in the Talmud at the end of Tractate Tanit, in which we read about how Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were visiting the site of the temple. They saw a fox leaving the area which had previously been the Holy of Holies. The rabbis who accompanied Rabbi Akiva burst out crying. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, began laughing. So the rabbis asked Rabbi Akiva, "What are you laughing for? What's so funny?" So Rabbi Akiva says to them, "And you, why are you crying? Why are you so sad?" He says, "What do you mean, why are we so sad? The place concerning which it says, no man apart from the high priest shall enter there, and even he is only allowed to enter there once a year. Now foxes are crawling over it. Should we not cry?" And Rabbi Akiva says to them, "That's why I'm laughing." And he says there are two prophecies. There's a prophecy of destruction, there's a prophecy of restoration. They're both mentioned in juxtaposition, in close proximity, one with the other. And he says, until I saw the prophecy of destruction take place, I didn't know the prophecy of restoration would take place. Now that I see that the prophecy of destruction has taken place, now I know that the prophecy of restoration will also take place. Now, if you look at this literally, it's very difficult to understand. Okay, he's comforted by the fact that seeing this fulfillment of the prophecy of destruction, there will at some future time be the prophecy of restoration. But is that a reason to laugh? In the meantime, there is only destruction. So why are you laughing? Rather, Maharal explains what it means is that Rabbi Akiva saw within the destruction itself the germ of restoration. He understood that the future temple could only come about as a result of the destruction. And therefore, when he saw the destruction of the temple, he thought, oh, this is the beginning of the third temple, which cannot take place without the destruction of the first two temples. And therefore, the destruction of the first two temples is itself a reason for rejoicing. It's part of the beginning of the aschalta, the commencement of the future redemption. And it is for this reason why when other rabbis heard Rabbi Akiva's explanation, they said to him, Akiva nichamtonu, Akiva nichamtonu, Akiva, you've comforted us, Akiva, you have comforted us. Although we're not absolutely like Rabbi Akiva, we certainly must try to strive to be on his level. And this is the meaning of what it says. If the Jewish people were to keep two Shabbatot, Shabbat Chazon and Shabbat Nachamu, if they were to see that within the negatives there are really positives, and that it's impossible for there to be positives without previously being negatives, so that everything is seen as part of an ultimately good and constructive process, then the Messiah would come. May God bless each and every one of us with this kind of positive attitude to life, and may we merit the coming of the Messiah even before Tisha B'Av, so that this Shabbat Chazon, which on the surface of it prophesies the destruction of the temple, should in fact be the Shabbat Chazon, literally the Shabbat of vision, the Shabbat in which we see the restoration of the third temple. Through Mashiach, for our righteous Messiah, May he redeem us speedily.